千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. As always, I want to extend my welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we are ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. We are now ready to start our discussion of Tao Te Ching Chapter 2. Along the way, I think you will find echoes in Chapter 2 of the concepts that we covered in Chapter 1. First, let's talk about the chapter title. Chapter 2 is Observe the Manifestations chapter. This is interesting because Chapter 1 was the Observe the Essence chapter. You can tell the logical progression from observing the essence to now observing the manifestations. And in this case, in this context, manifestations is what we perceive with our senses in the material world. So we can think of it this way. Tao Te Ching Chapter 1 was all about the Tao itself. Tao Te Ching Chapter 2 progresses logically to the function of the Tao, the manifestations of the Tao in the world in which we live. Tao Te Ching Chapter 1 talked about observing the essence of everything through a state that is free of desires, and therefore the observation of the non-existent, unattached state of Wu Wei. Because of that, Tao Te Ching Chapter 2 will discuss the various manifestations we observe in the material world. The observation of existence itself, in other words, the various aspects of our daily lives. Here's how the chapter looks. Unlike the brevity of Chapter 1, here we have a longer chapter, and therefore you can see that the font size is smaller, so we can squeeze in more of the text. Here is Tao Te Ching Chapter 2. When the world knows beauty as beauty, ugliness arises. When it knows good as good, evil arises. Thus, being and non-being produce each other. Difficult and easy bring about each other. Long and short reveal each other. High and low support each other. Music and voice harmonize each other. Front and back follow each other. Therefore, the sages manage the work of detached actions, conduct the teaching of no words. They work with myriad things but do not control. They create but do not possess. They act but do not presume. they succeed but do not dwell on success. It is because they do not dwell on success that it never goes away. That is the chapter, and we now want to divide it up, show the divisions in the multiple sections. You can tell I have already divided it up into 4 sections. Now let me show you the hints, the reasons why the divisions came out that way. Starting with the first 2 lines. So in the first 2 lines, I have singled out a bunch of characters. Not all of them match from line 1 to line 2, but there's enough of a match that you can see visually the correspondence, the repetition. Within the line itself, you can see that it has internal repetition as well. So for instance, in line 2, the 3rd character is the same as the 6th character there, 善. And there's repeating character as well. In line 1, the character for beauty, 美. There are other repeating characters between line 1 and line 2. For instance, the last character is the same for both lines. I have opted to not show the correspondence there, but just point them out because I want to focus on the main part of the line, and that's about knowing beauty as beauty, knowing good as good, which give rise to the complementary opposite. Now, what about line 3 to line 8? So first off, from line 4 down to line 8, you can see that they're all 4 characters. And some of the characters, you can see the repetition. The 3rd character is the same throughout those lines. And if you think of it as the next to last character, it brings the first line of that section, line 3, into adherence as well. The very first character of line 3 is the character for thus. If you do without it, that line will have the same structure as all the other lines in this section. So the character that I identify as the repetitious repeating character, I have also translated, pointed out by highlighting the translation on the right-hand side. So you can see that the same translation applies to the same character. Then, in the 3rd section, we start talking about the sages. Here, we have a repeating character from line 10 to line 11. It's the character that can be translated as the word of. But syntactically, when you translate it as of, you have to switch around the particles in the sentence. And in the last section, we also have correspondence that we can see. You can see the translation, identical words repeated, but do not. They correspond to the same characters on the left-hand side. And lastly, we can also detect a couple of repeating characters in lines 15 and 16, translated as do not dwell on success. The sages, this is in reference to the sages succeed but do not dwell on their success. They're able to get things done, but they do not dwell on the completion. So there's a lot more to say about that when we get to that line. But for now, though, we should be starting our line-by-line analysis, starting with the first line. So I want to break down a couple of characters for you, starting with the first two characters, and then we'll talk about the third and fourth characters. The first two characters is an often repeated expression, not just in the Tao Te Ching in ancient times, but also in modern Mandarin, still in use every day. 天下. Here's the pinyin. So don't get thrown off by the X. It's really just SH. 天下 is the way it sounds. Two characters. The first character means sky or heaven. The second character means below or beneath. Together, it means all below heaven, everything beneath the sky. In other words, the world. The world itself. It can also be a reference to everybody, everyone. When we say the world knows beauty as beauty, we're really saying when everybody knows beauty as beauty, when people in general know beauty as beauty, ugliness arises. Now, let's tackle the third and fourth characters. 皆知. So this means the first character means all, and the second character there means know. All know, meaning the whole world knows. Everyone knows. It's common knowledge. Everybody is aware of it. So now you see the meaning of the first four characters. When the world knows means when everybody in the world knows, when all the people around you knows. So let's continue to talk about the first line in its entirety. When the world knows beauty as beauty, ugliness arises. So the first thing I'll do is single out the character for beauty, 美. It means beauty or beautiful. Then look at the entire line. Let's note right here that what the world perceives is heavily tilted toward the external. By that, I mean external appearance. More superficial, more oriented toward physical appearance. So the reference here, superficial judgment of physical beauty. So think about how common that is in our world. Because the world, the material world, has that emphasis, those who study the Tao will see that the emphasis of the Tao is on the internal and not the external. And the purpose of that emphasis is to balance out the external, which is what most of the world is leaning towards. And if you think about this line, when the world knows beauty as beauty, ugliness arises, that means people are being compared in terms of beauty. And yes, that does happen all the time. And it is depicting the relative nature of beauty. Later on in this chapter, Lao Tzu will be very specific about that and talk about long and short, high and low. Here, it is also meant to depict that beauty is relative in the sense that when we compare and contrast, we come up with judgment of more beautiful or less beautiful, more ugly or less ugly. You can see the relative nature of beauty by something like a beauty pageant. In a beauty pageant, by definition, full of beautiful people being judged to determine who is the most beautiful. But if you bring yourself out of that context and take any one of the contestants in a beauty pageant into everyday life, into what you experience from the time you wake up to the time you go to sleep, you know that any one of them, even the contestant who doesn't win anything, if you put that contestant in an everyday crowd, that person will stand out. That person will be stunning. And yet, that person is not the one to win the prize. And that's because everything is relative. Then, let's also address the issue of judgment. In the Western study of the Tao, I have often heard people teach that being judgmental is a bad thing. You probably have heard that. People will say, don't judge, or don't be judgmental. If you are spiritual, you should not be judgmental. That's the teaching. The teaching is being judgmental is bad, and the irony is when you judge judgment as a bad thing, you are being judgmental. If you completely eliminate being judgmental, you would also not judge being judgmental as a bad thing. We kind of have to wrap our heads around that. Now, that's the modern take on spirituality that many teachers are still offering, despite the irony. The authentic study of the Tao does not pass judgment on judgment. Judgment is not good or bad, because we all have a need to evaluate, to assess, to pass judgment on whatever situation we're in every day of the week. We all need to use our critical faculties to figure out what is good or bad. And let's be frank, sometimes your survival depends on it. It depends on your ability to figure out what is good or bad, what is safe or dangerous. That's why judgment is part of life. It's not going away. There's no elimination of it. It's not necessarily a bad thing. It can be, but it doesn't have to be. Now, let me link this line that you see here. When the world knows beauty as beauty, ugliness arises. This, along with our discussion on how the world is heavily leaning toward physical beauty, this can be studied along with what we have already seen in chapter 1 for greater insights. So here we are, the Tao of beauty. So first, I begin with the line that we looked at. When the world knows beauty as beauty, ugliness arises. Keep in mind that we're talking about the material world. The world is this physical universe, the material plane in which we live. And in this world, we go right back to what it says in chapter 1. Constantly with desire, one observes its manifestations. That means the world is talking about most of us being totally immersed in material existence. We live our lives with materialistic desires. So what we see and know are mostly about the external manifestations, the physical appearance. And that is what this arrow here is meant to depict. Although we say, don't judge a book by its cover, we know quite well that is often what happens. People judge one another based on the initial surface level impression. Tao cultivators who understand this dynamic can transcend it and make their own assessment from a detached, desireless state. That state lets you look through the superficial level in order to observe the internal essence of a person. That is this right here, the counterpart to the previous line. Constantly without desire, one observes its essence. We can apply that to beauty as well. This means not just looking at pleasing appearance, but looking at the internal characteristics of the person. Now, Lao Tzu further notes that both internal and external arise from the Tao, and there's dynamic interaction between the two. That's represented here at the bottom. These two emerge together, but differ in name. So we have the external looks, the beauty that we see with our eyes, and then we have the internal beauty, what we can sense. And there's dynamic interaction between the two. This gives us some insights about life, that they affect one another. They both come from the Tao, and they interact. The internal affects the external affects the internal. So how can the external appearance affect the internal state of mind? Well, it's actually easy to see. We know that when we take proper care of our appearance, when we are presentable to the world, this external manifestation becomes like an expression of your internal essence. It's the essence, the sense of self-respect and confidence. You are also signaling to the people you interact with that you have a proper respect for that interaction. Therefore, you look good on the outside and you feel good on the inside. This is how the external can have an influence on the internal. I think that's easy to see. I think this is consistent with our daily experience. We've all had times when we're walking around, having taken care of the appearance, looking good and know it. And then people compliment you. Hey, you're looking nice today. Sometimes we say to people when they look very presentable, hey, you look like $1 million. And there's a smile on your lips when you look good and feel good, ready to take on the world. That's what this is about. So what about the other way around? What about the internal affecting the external? That's what Lao Tzu says or predicts will happen. We see that he is right. When you become more refined internally, you improve not just spiritually, but also that improvement drives the improvements mentally and physically. You are more together, quote unquote, as a person. Mentally, you've got, as they say, all your ducks in a row. You've got it together. You keep it together internally. This is sooner or later reflected in your appearance. Your appearance improves as a direct result and a reflection of your internal essence. That is how the internal can affect the external. It makes sense. It is also something that we have experienced. So a little more about all this discussion with physical beauty versus internal spiritual qualities, spiritually beautiful. What is all that? Let's compare. Physical beauty in our world, well, it's got a huge impact. Why does it have a huge impact? Well, after all, you and I, all of us, we are all physical beings. We can't deny that. We are all hardwired by evolution and biology to appreciate physical beauty in anyone. So someone with extreme beauty in that regard can have a big effect on people everywhere. You can tell that sometimes in the presence of extreme beauty, some people can become very tongue-tied or nervous. You can also tell that even those who say they don't care about looks, they too are powerfully affected by looks. We can't get away from the fact that we have that part of us that is so oriented toward physical beauty. Another way to see it is that we have entire industries. We have entire industries devoted, built on beauty. How so? Well, in the entertainment industry, anything that is performance-based puts a huge premium on physical appearance. Whether we're talking about movies, shows, plays, music, dance, any kind of presentation, all performance-based entertainment are fixated on beauty. We also have industries like cosmetics that is, of course, focused on beauty, beauty care, improving beauty, covering up flaws. It's a huge industry. Even the fitness industry, a big component of it is about looks. One can say, well, I'm getting into fitness because I want to be healthy. What is not being said, but just as true, is that I want to be more fit because I want to look better. Being more fit indeed will lead to better looks. The other big thing that we know about physical beauty is that it's transient. It doesn't last. By its very nature, it is not permanent. There's the beauty of youth. In the greater scheme of things, youth comes and goes very quickly. For many people, the beauty of youth perhaps will last 10 years, maybe 20 years. Then it starts slipping away because of age. And sometimes we look at people who are starting to slip, and perhaps we knew them as someone looking pretty good before. When we perceive an appearance that is not as good as the way you used to be, we may say things like, wow, he really let himself go. meaning he has not taken good care of his physical appearance. Maybe out of shape, maybe sloppily dressed, maybe bad posture, or a combination of the above. And that's the other side of it too, that people in trying to keep beauty, youth, for as long as possible, devote time and effort into maintenance. All kinds of cosmetics, beauty care products are used and make tons of money because of our obsession, perhaps attachment with beauty. Now let's examine the other side. What about the spiritual beauty? Unlike physical beauty. Well, physical beauty, we know, is something that can make an immediate impression. When you see someone, your initial impression is going to be about the looks. With spiritual beauty, it is something that is not immediately apparent, but can be perceived over time. When you get to know someone, get to know how they think, how their minds work. Of course, in the Tao, we should also note, when we're talking about beauty, it's not just about the intangible qualities of a person. It can be about things associated with that person. May not be virtues, maybe things like someone having a vision, a dream, an ideal, and so on. So one thing we know for sure, non-physical beauty remains long after physical beauty has faded. We can say it is possible for that beauty to be enhanced by age, whereas age does not have a positive effect on physical beauty. Now, I would also say this, spiritual beauty can be seen in the soul. How can we see it? Well, one way is to see that beauty by looking through the eyes of a loved one. You are looking through the windows to the soul. When you look into the eyes, you are making contact from your soul to theirs. What do you see? It is hard to put into words, but it is the beauty that does not fade with the passage of time. Here's another way, a variation on this theme. Look into the eyes of a baby. What do you see there? I think you can see wonder, innocence, curiosity, fun. Indeed, it can be quite the privilege to see someone, the baby's true nature, before the baby begins taking on all the tainting influence of the material world. So let me ask everybody this question. What do other people see when they look into your eyes? Is it something beautiful? Can it be beautiful? Well, it cannot be beautiful if there is constant shifting of the eyes. If you are constantly avoiding the gaze, constantly looking somewhere else, constantly unable to sustain that soul-to-soul connection, that is the only way that it can be anything other than beautiful. Because you know there's something to hide, even if nobody else is aware of it. That gives us a clue on the next point, that internal spiritual beauty is something that can be cultivated. Cultivating the Tao, practicing the virtues, these are easy ways to attain this special kind of beauty, consider something as simple as basic honesty. Truth is beautiful. Therefore, the virtue of honesty is beautiful. And if you cultivate yourself to be consistent in your words and actions, that's beautiful too. To be consistent, not have your words be different from what you actually do. What about the way that you treat other people? If you act from the Tao and treat everyone the same, you become someone who can be very comfortable meeting anybody's gaze. You can hold the contact steady while your heart remains at peace, harmonious and joyous. When that is the case, the harmony, peace, and joy you feel within will very naturally transmit over to the other person. It is soothing. It is inviting. It is beautiful. That is internal beauty. Now, when we talk about external appearance, beauty, perhaps not so beautiful, versus internal beauty or ugliness, there is a story from the Tao tradition that I would like to share with you. It is a story from Zhuangzi called The Ugly Man. It is not one of the well-known stories, so I am especially happy to be able to share it with you. Here's the Zhuangzi story of the ugly man. In ancient China, back in the days of the warring states, one of the most powerful rulers was Duke Ai in the Lu Kingdom. The Duke had something on his mind that puzzled him. He could not resolve it on his own, so he decided to consult with Confucius. He said to Confucius, there was a man in the Wei Kingdom known for being ugly. Despite that, men who spent time with him ended up not wanting to leave his company. Women who met him told their parents, I would rather be his concubine than someone else's wife. There were more than 10 women like that, and the number kept increasing. He never asserted his views. Instead, he often seemed to agree with others. He never had the power of a ruler to save people's lives, nor the wealth of a rich man to feed the hungry. He was ugly enough to scare everyone, and his knowledge did not extend beyond himself. Regardless, men and women all wished to get closer to him. So there must be something about him that made him different from the typical person. I summoned him to see for myself, and it was true. He was ugly to the extreme. However, after spending some time with him, in less than a month, I came to admire his character. In less than a year, I came to trust him completely. I didn't have a minister to handle the affairs of the state at the time, so I asked him to take on the job. He did not respond initially. When he finally responded, it sounded as if he wished to decline. I was disappointed, but still insisted on giving him the responsibility. He left soon after that, and I felt lost. I felt as if there was no one to share the pleasures of the kingdom with me. What sort of man was he? This was the question that the Duke put to Confucius. Confucius gave him a lengthy reply. At the end of his reply, he provided the Duke with the following conclusion. This man did not speak much, and yet he had people believing him. He did not accomplish much, and yet he drew people to him. You wish to entrust your kingdom to his care, and you felt apprehensive that he would not accept the appointment. This means he must be someone with both wisdom and talents internally, but does not reveal his virtues externally. That is what made him so different from the typical person. The end. The Tao. First, Confucius was perceptive. He pointed out the one thing that was the most crucial difference, because in general, most people were only too eager to showcase how much they knew, showcase their many talents. But this man preferred to keep to himself. He let any revelations about his hidden qualities occur organically and naturally over time. So he was not attracted to people because of power or wealth. As the Duke said, he had neither. He was not like a ruler. He could not save people's lives. He was not wealthy. He could not feed the hungry. He did not advance his views. He was not like a great speaker or debater. Nevertheless, people loved him. In addition to this most crucial point expressed by Confucius, we can also see the answers in the various descriptions provided by the Duke. The bottom line was that the man more than made up for his unattractive appearance with the intangible qualities he possessed. These qualities would not be apparent at first glance, exactly as we have discussed in terms of spiritual beauty, but this man could have his qualities be perceived in the course of one's interactions with him. So what made the ugly man attractive? What were the qualities? Well, he was a good listener. When so many people just wanted to tell everyone what they thought, the Duke described him as being more interested in hearing what people had to say, more interested in that than advancing his own views. Never underestimate the power of listening. He was unmoved by power. He was not tempted by power. The position of the Duke's minister was powerful and prestigious. Many people lusted after the position, but this man did not. This meant his personal goals were much more spiritual than material. He had the ability to let go. How so? Well, the palace of the ruler, the Duke, was full of luxuries. But when this man felt it was time for him to leave, he left it all behind without attachments. He could let go. He possessed internal, admirable character traits, which became obvious to other people only after they got to know him. As we talked about, for physical beauty, surface appearance would only be good for the initial impression. After that, inner qualities matter more in the long run. The man's virtues won over men and women, including the Duke himself. Among his admirable character traits, the most significant one was trustworthiness. This was important because it was in a setting where most people were out for themselves. The Duke wanted a friend to share the good things in life, someone to trust completely. And that is why it was such a loss to him when the man left. And remember what we talked about, that as people know beauty as beauty, ugliness arises. That means beauty stands out, becomes clear when subject to comparison. This applies to internal qualities every bit as it does on external physical beauty. When you look at these characteristics here, people would compare what the ugly man brought to the table in terms of his inner qualities, compare that with what they see in other people. They would note that many people were ego-driven. They loved the sound of their own voice, so they could not stop talking. This got annoying after a while. This was not attractive. They compared this man's position to power, being unmoved by power, to others, and they saw how many people were motivated by the pursuit of power. Definitely unattractive when seen clearly. We have that in our world today. After all, human nature has remained the same throughout the ages, and that's why we have it. We can see in the news those who chase after power. We can see their downfall, and it's a repulsive sight. What about letting go? Well, comparing to someone who is able to let go, we can notice, as the people in ancient times did notice, how many tend to grasp onto attachments with a death grip. When they do so, when they refuse to let go, they looked increasingly desperate in the process. Desperation is not a good look. Now, what about the admirable character traits? When we look around, we can see how there are people blessed with good looks. But then, if you get to know them, you uncover unsavory traits that were kept hidden initially. Compared to that, someone with beautiful internal traits is like a breath of fresh air. Lastly, the most important, trustworthiness. We look around and we realize one thing: not everyone can be trusted. There are people who betray a trust from you, whether through active sabotage or disseminating malicious rumors. Those people become every bit as unattractive as the trustworthy person is attractive. So there is a lot to be said for the internal qualities. I want to share with you that this idea is not unique to the East. This is something that is also something that can be found in Western culture and Western traditions. I want to bring to your attention Voltaire, French philosopher from about 250 years ago. There's a quote by Voltaire, in French, of course. Let me translate that alleged quote for you. I don't think this quote has been confirmed, but it's definitely out there as part of the Western cultural fabric. When translated, this phrase says, from Voltaire, "Give me a minute to make you forget my face with my conversation, and I will seduce the Queen of France." It's expressing a similar concept. The inner qualities. In the case of Voltaire, his wit, his intelligence that was very attractive to the people that got to know him. This applied to inner non-physical beauty. Now we can see the meaning of the line from Lao Tzu. When the world knows beauty as beauty, ugliness arises. It's true externally, it is just as true internally. We are approaching the end of our time together today. So I want to jump to the summary and provide everyone with just a quick concluding remark on what we have talked about today. Let me focus on Chapter 2. Chapter 2, you will discover next time, delves deeply into the yin and yang complementary dualities. We have explored just now the beauty, ugliness, beautiful, ugly, complementary pair. There's more. There's a lot more. But the major point is that we understand the world through these complementary dualities. Attractive and unattractive is one of them. There's also going to be kindness and malice. We'll talk about that next time. This chapter will also get into measurements that only have meaning relative to one another. Long and short, high and low, the list goes on. Big and small, heavy and light. So many measurements have meaning only when compared to someone else. So this is a quick preview of our discussion next time. Another quick preview is about the way that we can work with complementary dualities, choosing the empowering perspective, choosing to see things in a certain way that is beneficial for us. So the examples that we're going to cover next time include abundance or lack. Lack as in insufficiency, not having enough. There is also a lesson on being ahead or behind. So these are quick previews for next time. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.